This is the Red Alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios. Throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
For 5 years, 1,000 gallons of gas, air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada, streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, and Odyssey. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim, and today is November the 3rd, 2023, and this is episode 393 of Workshop Radio. In just 2 minutes, guys, I've got a guy waiting in the official green room out back. Yeah, coming on here in just a minute. An incredible author, a dude that I have been asked on multiple occasions to bring on, and he brings a ton of cool information. I can't wait to dig in with him. But Jonathan Hollerman, who wrote Survival Theory 1 and 2, and some books you might know called EMP. We'll get into that in just a minute. Real quick, two quick things. Sponsored today, Homestead Ham Radio. Good friends of mine, they took a chance on this podcast ages ago when it was just starting. Give them a shot. Their link is in the description. And the only other thing today, guys, is going forward, starting next week, you have spoken, I've listened. We are going to go to 6 p.m. Mountain Time for live streams. It allows the East Coast fellers to get in on it as well. So just so they're not staying up too late, because you know how it is. So anyway, with that, give me 1 minute here and we will bring on. Hey, Jonathan, how are you, brother?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Tim.
Dude, I'm excited. I got a shout out to a buddy of mine named Chin. We were at Prepper Camp earlier this year, and he's like, I've asked you like 6 times to get Jonathan on the show. He said he met you at a previous event, which I'm sure you meet hundreds and hundreds of people, but he said you were switched on, and I said, at the time, I was halfway through Survival Theory 1. I finished it, went back and reread it a second time for today. So tell us a bit about who you are, sir. Just kind of where you started. I know you're a farm boy from PA, but from there, keep going.
Sure. Yeah. I was a farm boy from PA. I was a former military SEER instructor. SEER stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. I wrote a book series called EMP, Equipping Modern Patriots, a story of survival here. Oh, man, that was probably 12 years ago. And that did very well. And I also wrote Survival Theory 1, Survival Theory 2, which were both #1 bestsellers on Amazon in the survival preparedness genres, as well as experimental psychology. Probably around 10 years ago now, I started a company called Grid Down Consulting. And since then, I've worked with over 500 high net worth families and helped them build off-grid survival retreats from the ground up, or just doing analysis of existing survival retreats and making recommendations. And I corporately, probably around 5 years ago, I started getting involved in the fight to harden the electric grid alongside groups like Secure the Grid Coalition, the FBI's InfraGard. I was invited to be a part of the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force wargaming effort down at Maxwell Air Force Base here. That was probably 4 years ago. That was a joint services wargaming operation with all your alphabet agencies and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the DOE, the National Security Council, the CIA, NSA, all those groups. And we wargamed the Grid Down event for the military and the country. That was a huge eye-opening experience for me to really discover exactly how unprepared the American government is to respond to a nationwide Grid Down event. There's actually, if you don't know, there's no plan on FEMA, military, or government to respond to a nationwide Grid Down event. And then I've been on the board of directors at Impact America for quite a few years, and I am currently the deputy director at the U.S. Task Force on National Homeland Security, which is a congressional advisory board alongside the EMP Commission that was started under the late, great Dr. Peter Pry.
Man, you're good at giving an elevator pitch. I appreciate that. That was awesome. You know how to tell your story, brother. I appreciate that. So, all right, farm boy from PA. I don't suppose you just woke up one morning and was like, hey, I want to be a SEER instructor. And how did that kind of interest come about for you? Because I don't know, reading it was something like 8,000 people try and maybe a dozen or two make it. So how did you get into that?
So I actually did wake up one day and say, hey, I want to do that. That's
yes.
So farm boy from PA, I grew up hiking and camping with my father and hunting. So I love the outdoors, and I was going to go to college to become into the forestry department until I realized they basically make zero money. And then I heard about SEER, and it is not a guaranteed job in the military. You have to go in at a certain time to apply. There were 8,000 applicants for my class. There's 2 classes a year. There's one that starts in January, one starts in July. I was a winter class, started in January. So there were 8,000 applicants, a whole bunch of testing, a whole bunch of physical testing as well as psychological testing. And then I think around 200 of us started what they call the stock program down in Texas. Okay. And it is just they ruck you, they take your water, food away, they just push you. And out of that 200, there were 34 of us that made it through to actually start training. And our first class was 21 days in the mountains of Washington State, 6 feet of snow, frigid temperatures. And of that 34, that first class, I think we lost about a third. We were down to 23, I believe, at the end of that first class, and then 17 of us graduated. So yeah, it was a very difficult training course to get through. A lot of it was not just physical was a big part of it, but a lot of it was mental, because they just push, when you take food away, take sleep away, put you in very bad conditions, and just push you past your limits. And it's, I don't want to say it's like SEALs school, like Navy SEALs, because it's not at all. I'm not claiming that, but there is if you say I quit, kind of like SEAL school where you ring the bell, and SEER, if you say I quit a single time, you're done. I mean, they'll take you back to the trucks, warm you up, and get you a hot food, but you don't get to go back. So it was a lot of mental pressure, and that. So a lot of people, they look back at my SEER experience and they're like, oh, you're in preparedness because of your survival experience and your woodcraft experience. And it's not really the case. The reason I'm in this space is because my experience with starvation and my experience with hunger and desperation and the mental aspects that come into play when you take people's food away, that played a huge role. And 15 years ago, I'm reading some preparedness fictions from a lot of big authors, and I'm realizing they don't understand this aspect. And that's a big area that the American preparedness community does not understand, is what a society looks like when you take their food and their hope away.
So I was listening to another interview of yours earlier this morning, and you'd mentioned about how you'd seen grown men break down and cry in training and had to carry them. And it seems to be kind of a cool theme, not a cool theme, but it's a theme that comes through a lot, is that intangible, that grit is one of those kind of pillars of preparedness. How did you not say I quit in your SEER training? And how did you get to that point where you didn't become one of those guys that needed to be drug around kind of crying?
So the guys that started training with me, they were all top tier guys. Most of them came out of pararescue that failed the water portion of pararescue. So like I said, the physical aspect of it wasn't so much the case. It was more just the mental push to just climb out of that warm sleeping bag every morning in sub-zero temperatures and get your day started. So that was more the mental part. When I mentioned that about crying men, I was mentioning, like, once I became a SEER instructor and started carrying troops in the SEER training school, which was 21 days long, I didn't have a single class of students, typically between 8 and 13, where I didn't have a full grown man break down crying at some point in the training. And that wasn't training to become a SEER instructor. That was just normal SEER training. So they weren't being pushed near as far as we were during that training. But it's a mental game. It's just hey, this is what you got to do, and you just press forward.
Just kind of one step in front of the other, and don't say quit now, kind of, or.
Oh, I wanted to quit lots of times. I came close. I ain't gonna lie.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. You lost, I think, did they read you lost 15 pounds during those 3 weeks?
Yeah. So that first trip, like I said, I was a winter class. So it was, I think, the second day of January, we started training in the mountains of Washington State, 6 feet of snow on the ground. I think the warmest day was 5 degrees. And for my group of 8 guys, they gave us a small box of vegetables and a goat. And that food was all gone by the end of probably day 10 or day 11. And I mean, going into that training, I was peak physical condition, like 0% body fat, extremely fit. And by the end of that trip, I lost 15 pounds. I was very lean back then too. And so it was that first trip, the mental aspect of it was a lot of it was not having food. And I tell the story how, like, when we were out there, my brother's sitting around the campfire at night towards the end of the trip, every single person, we all had a Write in the Rain tablet for taking notes out in the field. And the only thing that was discussed was food. We would literally fantasize about food. And I'm not even pulling punches here. Like, you would sit there and we would sit around the campfire and be like, peanut M&Ms and pizza, bacon pizza, and you would just sit there and you would have this like list of food that you were going to get when you got back on the base, and we would just sit there and we would just talk about, that's all you're so beyond hunger at that point. You've kind of gotten past the hunger pains, but you're still, that's all your brain is thinking about. And when I got back, I'll never forget that the night we got back to base, getting that food on my list. I remember exactly. It was 2 large Domino pizzas with pepperoni and bacon, and I had a 1 pound bag of peanut M&Ms and a 2 liter Coca-Cola. And I would eat until I threw up, and then I would eat until I threw up, and probably 5 or 6 times that night. It was such a weird, surreal experience to have access to food again after being starving for so long.
So then you left the Air Force at some point going forward, and kind of what happened between there and when you started to become aware of the threat of an EMP?
Sure. So kind of preparedness was always in the forefront of my mind just because of my background. But I went to college for carpentry and cabinetry. I worked construction for quite a few years. I had a company flipping houses. I owned a drive-through coffee, espresso, and pastry shop similar to my fiction book for quite a few years. And during that time frame, I've never been a hugely political guy, though I am a born-again Christian, and that aspect of it is very important to me. But I read a book called 1 Second After. So I believe you've had William Forstchen on here before. So he's a New York Times bestseller. That's a amazing book. It's an amazing introduction into the grid down threats. He does a excellent job painting a world with picture or with words. And so I read that book when it first came out. I think it was around 2006, maybe 2007. And the EMP threat, I had never been I'd never heard of it. Right. And so as an analytical guy, I just started studying. I downloaded all these government reports and learning and educating myself on the threat. And that led me into solar flare threat and the cyber attack on the grid, physical attacks on the grid. And I just kept devouring information. At the same time, I'm reading a bunch of prepper fiction books at the time, and most of them having to do with a nationwide grid down event. And I'm reading these books, and the authors they don't understand human nature. They don't understand starvation and how people are going to react. The stories, everybody always in that kind of environment, it's normalcy bias, because a lot of these guys writing these stories were born and raised in the richest country in the world, in America or Canada, and they've never experienced starvation. They've never been to a third world country, and they just don't understand the psychological toll it takes on a human being. And so a lot of their interactions there, I just thought were kind of foolish. So that's what caused me to write my first EMP fiction book here. I don't know, it was probably a dozen years ago, not long after that. So I wrote that book thinking I'd sell like 10 copies to my ex-military buddies, and I started selling like 15 or 20 books a day. And I thought, right after I released it that week, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I went to hunting camp, and I was gone for like 4 or 5 days, and then with no phone reception. And we went to dinner the one night, and I checked my phone, and I was selling like 150 copies a day. And then by the next day, it was like 200 copies a day. So it just kind of, and ended up making up to the top 10 bestsellers list in post-apocalyptic and dystopian genres, which are big genres on Amazon. Yeah. So it did really well, and it kind of opened the door, and I kind of transitioned my day job into writing and preparedness. And that was, like I said, probably I don't know, 15 years ago, 12 years, somewhere in there.
Sure.
I don't even know when I wrote my book. It was a while ago.
So anytime somebody brings up 1 second after, I got to ask, how bad did the retirement home scene stick with you? Do you remember
Yep. I do remember. It's been a long time since I've read the book, but that whole book was compelling. So William Forstner did an excellent job explaining and painting the first couple weeks of a nationwide grid down event. So that it's a small town of Black Mountain, North Carolina, and it's about the mayor and some of the leadership in the town trying to help the town survive this type of scenario. Now, with that said, it's probably in my top 3 book recommendations for people that are being introduced into this subject. However, it's important to note that towards the end of the book, and I'm not giving any spoilers here, there's a time jump. There's I think there's like a 6-month time jump from the early winter till spring. And then all of a sudden the military shows up and there's relief, which is never, we can get into that, but that's never going to happen. But that 6-month time jump, I mean, that was a town of, I think, 500 people. Let's just say there's 350 people still alive at the beginning of that time jump. What he never showed, and kind of the fault in the book, is that the average human eats 2,000 pounds of food a year, or a metric ton of food a year. That mayor would have had to supply a metric ton of food every single day for that town in a world with no food, in a world where people are killing each other over a can of peaches. So that was one of my biggest takeaways. Next spring comes and it doesn't explain how all these people were fed throughout the winter. So that was, again, one of the big reasons why I wrote my book, is just kind of, and all these stories, they leave out the starvation side of it and how much of an impact, because I've actually worked, I've been hired as a consultant for 2 different small towns, one in Utah and one up in north of Montreal there a ways. And I spent 2 days with the mayor in Utah, and we went through every resource the town had, from their cattle and their grain bins, and how much food they had in the town. I think the town was around 500 people, just over 500 people. And at the end of 2 days, it's not feasible, because yes, the idea is, we're going to grow our own food, we're going to get past this, but you don't get your first harvest for 75 days. Your carrots, your potatoes, assuming it's the summer or spring when this happens, it's going to be a while till you can start producing enough food to feed everybody. So for that 75 days, again, you need a metric ton of food into that town every day. And I think the cattle and the grain bins, we did the numbers, and it was only going to last 30 days. It's just, so if you're not feeding your populace, you're not going to maintain law and order. You're just not. If people's kids are starving to death, you're not going to maintain law and order. You're not going to maintain any kind of system.
So I've heard you mention before, and you mentioned it today too, that lots of books get it wrong. And I get that they kind of miss the starvation end of things. Are there any, I want to touch on this. There's so many ways I want to go with it, but are there any books or movies or TV shows that maybe get it right?
No.
Okay. That's great.
Well, Hollywood definitely doesn't. None of the movies. I remember probably, oh man, this must have been 6 or 7 years ago. Do you remember the TV show Revolutions?
Yeah.
There was a TV show coming out, I think it was on NBC, called Revolutions. I remember seeing the trailer, and it started out with all the lights winking out in the city, and there's no power, and suddenly, so basically like an EMP attack. And me and my boys actually had a viewing party. We actually got together. We're like, this is great. There's an EMP show. And we went to watch it. And by the 3rd episode, we were just clowning so hard on, it was just so ridiculous. And then same with the kind of the preparedness fiction. I'll be honest with you. I've got probably 50 books in that genre, and 80% of them, I've only made it about 25% of the way through. I think, I don't want to name names, but one of the real big popular ones, the guy's, I think, in Florida, and his family's in Montana, if I remember correctly. When the thing goes off, he's like a traveling salesman, and he has his bug out bag, and he's got 6 MREs in the back of that, in the back of his vehicle. And as this, like, I didn't even make it a quarter way through the story, and the guy's already eaten like 20 MREs. Like, I'm just envisioning like this Sherpa with cases of MREs. He's giving them out. I'm like, didn't you have 6 to begin with? Like, how does this work? You know? So that may sound harsh, but that's just because of my experience in that area. The one exception to that, so I mentioned 1 second after, so outside that time jump, fantastic book. He paints a picture really well. But the other really top recommendation I have is The Dark Secrets of SHTF Survival by Selko Begovic. So it's not fiction. It is firsthand narrative of a guy that lived through a grid down event in modern times in the late 90s. During the Bosnian conflict, his city was surrounded. All their power and resources were cut off. And they had very, very little food. They got a couple food drops here or there, but they were eating moldy bread with maggots in it and stuff like that. And his firsthand experience of that is a must read. It's probably one of my number one most recommended books is Selko Begovic, The Dark Secrets of SHTF Survival, because it's eye-opening. It shows the mental toll. He discusses what it feels like to take a life in self-defense, and people's idea of this type of scenario is like The Walking Dead, and you know, you're gonna have these zombie hordes storming you across the field, and you're gonna just shoot them, and you're gonna go to bed. It's not really realistic. So
that's kind of what propelled you to write Equipping Modern Patriots, then, I'm guessing.
Yes.
And so what's kind of cool whenever I get to interview authors, especially ones out of the preparedness field, is a lot of the guys don't come from writing background. And I'm going to guess you didn't either.
What are you saying, Tim?
I'm just
no, 100%. I absolutely, I hated English class. And so I told the story of how my first book came out. Well, I had an English teacher edit my first book before I released it. And I think I gave him a case of Pepsi, or I paid him just a little bit, you know what I mean, to do it. And then as soon as I released that book, people were like, oh, there's a whole bunch of grammar issues. So I had to rush out and hire a professional company to edit that book quickly and get it, get the edited version out there. So yeah, I mean, I self-taught. So after that first book, so anybody that reads my fiction series, just make it through the first one. I mean, the grammar and stuff is fixed, but I didn't. So I'll tell you a little insider thing. I actually started writing that book on my living room couch in a note. I still have the notebook. So I was handwriting that book on rolled paper. So I wrote about the first third of it before I even pulled out a laptop and started typing. Because I was a slow typer at the time too. So, and so, I mean, I basically self-taught. I bought all your, how to write. I didn't write an outline. That first book I wrote from page 1 till page 360, consecutively. I didn't have an outline. So I basically had to educate myself. Books 2 and 3. I mean, obviously if anybody's read the series, you'll notice my writing ability gets significantly better to the third book. But yeah, I mean, anytime I handed a manuscript to my editor, I know she bawls and cries when she receives it.
So I love that. So you basically learned on the fly. You wrote the book, put it out there, and then you're like, I better get it edited again.
Yes. And then between the second, third books, I started buying How to Write for Dummies and, I self-taught myself how to write a fiction book, show, don't tell. And I did a lot of telling in the first book and less showing. So I learned a lot, obviously, between the first, second books. And obviously I have Survival Theory 1, Survival Theory 2, and I have the fourth book of the EMP series is going to be coming out here before Christmas as well.
Oh, nice. So can I ask you a little about the show, don't tell? What does that mean? I mean, I kind of get it, but what does that concept kind of mean to you as an author?
Well, it means exactly that. Bob picked up his gun and went to the door, right? And there's instead of just telling specifically dun, 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 dun. You actually show it through a vocabulary and through words and through adjectives and adverbs and being descriptive. So it's about descriptive writing. Obviously, if you read any New York Times bestseller, there's some guys I really like Brandon Sanderson and guys like that. I mean, these guys are masters at painting pictures with words. And that's just something that you have to learn how to do. So my first book was a lot more linear, as in things happening, as opposed to painting the world in pictures.
So then you went into theory of survival, which I don't know if I've ever read it. It read like a college textbook in the best way possible. To me, if I had to give that, if there was one book, and I've read a bunch, if there was one book I'd have to give to somebody like, hey, you've never done anything with prepping before. Here it is. And I loved it because you treated it so earnestly and you treated it like it was a fact that it was going to happen. And I think the main thing out of it I wanted to ask was, you talk about not being a lone wolf, but you also talked multiple times about how larger communities, like trying to kind of pen in a cul-de-sac, may not work. So where's the ideal balance in that?
Okay, so first off, we have to express that my company motto is prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and let God do the rest. Okay, I firmly believe that if you're going to get into preparedness, you need to look at the worst case scenario, which is a nationwide grid down event, and wrap your brain around that before you start preparing. So a lot of people latch on to a kind of a regionalized disaster. If you live in Florida, you're obviously preparing for a hurricane. Or if you live in Kansas or Oklahoma, Tornado Alley, you're preparing for a tornado. And then some people latch on to financial collapse, and that's all they ever prepare for is a financial collapse. Problem is, if you only prepare for a financial collapse and then something worse happens, your preparations are not going to function. So this comes back at from a long-standing preparedness history. One of the guys in the 70s I really liked was Mel Tappan. I used to read him early on. And kind of the mindset is that the people that lived back there had more life skills than the people that live today. So first off is understanding what threat we're talking about. So when when I go forward here and I start saying the things I'm going to say, please understand that I'm talking about a very long-term collapse scenario. I'm not talking about a 1 week, 2 week, 3 week event. I'm talking about an event that lasts for years.
Sure. And
if that's the case, long-term survival in an urban environment is not wise, and you will most likely die. So a lot of hey, I'm going to join forces with my next door neighbors in my cul-de-sac in the suburbs of Atlanta. There's so much of that happening, and a lot of the prepper sphere on YouTube, they tell you, spray paint your windows and put an X on your door, throw trash out in the front yard, put a 6-foot privacy fence in your backyard. You can garden. None of your neighbors are going to figure this out. None of your neighbors that you're teamed up with, for security and all this stuff are going to figure out that you're the only one that's not getting skinny and you're sucking your belt in, moving it in a couple notches over time. You think you're going this long-term food that you stocked up in your basement in the middle of a city because you borrowed a mower from your neighbor and you let him borrow your grill once, this guy's not a threat to me. We're part of the same group. And that's true for 1 week or 2 weeks. But when that man's 6-year-old daughter is laying on the couch, and we're talking 6 weeks in, 8 weeks in, and he hasn't been able to provide that girl, his daughter, food she's dying, that man's a natural born killer. That's just human nature. What wouldn't a person do to get food for their loved ones? And this idea that it's normalcy bias, it's just an idea of thinking in terms of today in the richest country in the world, like I mentioned, and police and 911. You just have this idea where you can have these sane conversations with people that are utterly desperate and starving. It's just not going to be the case. So these groups, I'm not anti-group. I'm very pro mutual assurance group, but you have to do it outside the confines of mass population centers. The idea that you're going to, you have even 100,000, 50,000 people in a close proximity to you. If you're gardening and thriving, you've still got 50,000 threats that are right there. I mean, people have diesel generators like in town. It's like, you don't think people are going to hear that sound carries a long way in a dark and a quiet world. You're the only one with lights. You're the only one cooking inside your house. None of your neighbors or the surrounding groups or warlords. Again, this is where I'd point to Selko Begovic, because he explains how in a modern city, how fast it fell apart. And it went from street to street kind of fighting each other, then down to like family clan to family clan. And then there was warlords that took over. And this is stuff that's like, this is science fiction, people think, for modern America. It can't happen here. We've evolved past, the Viking days. We just haven't. It's just human nature. The only reason you think that is because we've had peace for so long, and you've got policemen and firefighters you can call, and you can go to a hospital and get your boo-boos fixed. And that's just not going to be the case in this environment. So it's going to get very desperate. So there is a balance between bugging in and bugging out. Bugging in is fine for short-term events, long-term events. It's just not the case. However, and I know I'm going long here, but however, it is not a binary choice. So the urban prepper sphere online, they're going to tell you, well, if you don't bug in, your only other option is to wander the open road or go live off the national forest like the Legend of Mick Dodge. And I just refute that. In my book Survival Theory 2, I lay out 5 or 6 different strategies for people on next to like little to no budget on how you can still bug out, even if you can't afford to build a multi-million-dollar survival retreat. So there are options. You just got to think outside of the box. And so it's not a binary choice where you're either bugging in or you're just going to be wandering around the open road, because I would reject that philosophy as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the bugging out end of things then, because some sort of survival retreat or somewhere to go, like you'd mentioned Mel Tappan in his book on survival was incredible.
Yes.
And did you ever go, Don Stevens, he coined the term retreaters from the 60s. So decade to decade, there was always lots of talk about get out of the cities and have a well-stocked kind of larder / retreat location. So how does one do that? How does one start? Somebody calls you up and is like, hey, Jonathan, where do I start with this?
So because of how large my business has grown, and I'm a one-man show, I only have the ability to work with probably 5 or 6 clients at a given time that are building from the ground up. So I do probably 70% of my business is doing existing survival retreat analysis, where they'll fly me out and I'll go through their entire location and make recommendations on their underground food storage and solar power and EMP hardening and security and things like that. But because I can only take so many people, I charge a significant amount of money for my services. So like I guess the blue collar worker probably is not going to be able to afford to hire me to work with them. That's why I wrote Survival Theory 1 and Survival Theory 2, is to kind of pay back to my roots. And, the blue collar guy that, like I said, that can't afford a $2 million survival retreat. There are options for you, right? You just have to spend more time brainstorming and thinking outside the box.
I love it. We're big fans of entrepreneurship and making money here, man. Making money and helping people aren't mutually exclusive. So that I love hearing that. So I wanted to clarify a little too, because I guess let's just say, again, kind of the Survival Theory 2 book was written for that. So just a casual coffee conversation. What are some tips that somebody who's not at least upwardly mobile could kind of get started?
Okay. So let me preface this again. We're talking about long-term national grid down event. We're not talking about localized disasters, which is where a lot of preppers' headspace is. So we're talking end of the world, end of civilization type event, right? Each of these 5 or 6 methods that I lay out in Survival Theory 2 are not great options. Okay. The number one threat in this type of a world-ending scenario is people and lack of food. Okay, so those are 2 things that you have to. Those are going to be the 2 hardest things to conquer. Every single human being that you come into an interaction with is a threat in this environment. Every single one. Doesn't matter if it's a little old lady, because people that are in deep starvation and human desperation are capable of incredible things. Read the book Philip Zimbardo, the Lucifer Effect. He's a world-renowned psychologist, and the subtitle's called "How Good People Turn Evil." How a young farm boy from Oklahoma can go over to Vietnam and do incredibly terrible things, and then come home and work a 9 to 5. And he studied the Nazi concentration camp workers, and how they you'd find them 30 years later and they got a wife and 4 kids, and they're an esteemed member of their community. So you have to understand that people are threats, and having the ability to be self-reliant and grow your own food is very important. You mentioned Mel Tappan and Davidson, and those are great names. And in fact, in Survival Theory 2, I have a Q&A kind of a back and forth with a guy that lasts almost a chapter, who's in that headspace alongside Mel Tappan. Community, get out of the city, live in a community, be part of that. And we have a very productive back and forth for almost an entire chapter on kind of that old world prepping mentality compared to today, because today every aspect of human life revolves around electricity. The life skills today just aren't present on long-term survival without electricity. So I'll give like one basic one. So again, with all that in mind, the 4 or 5 solutions that I mentioned in that book, they're not great. I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, this is fantastic. There's no risk involved here. Here's a 5-step solution to this problem. I'm just saying doing one of these 5 or a compilation of one of these 5 techniques is better than sitting around in the middle of a city with no resources and tens of thousands of people that will take your life at a moment's notice. So one of them is like, if you have a rural relative that has a farm, okay, is one scenario. I mean, you might say, well, my Uncle Charlie has this farm that's out rurally, but, I can't talk to him about prepping. This is kind of crazy, which is fine, because the first rule of preparedness is keeping your mouth shut and not talking about it. But if that conversation does not go well, say, hey, I'd like to store some of my stuff here. So that's part of the problem is a lot of the survival people will tell everybody to hoard up all this food and water and supplies and guns and ammunition and all these resources, but they do it at home in suburbia. So when this event happens, they're tied to that location. The idea of leaving all that stuff behind to flee the chaos and the murder and the neighbor killing neighbor that's happening 2 or 3 weeks into this event, they don't want, it's a death sentence to leave all that food and stuff behind. They don't want to do that. So my philosophy is find the area that you're going to bug out to. And so, for instance, if you had a second cousin with a farm and they're not willing to let you store stuff there, find the closest climate-controlled storage facility and store all your stuff nearby there. And then, when this event does happen, you show up at Uncle Charlie's and you're like, now you're a forward thinker. Now it all makes sense, and you can run down and bring your food in, your seeds and your supplies. I mean, that's just one strategy. That's probably the simplest strategy. And there's just and so I've had clients that, like, when I was working with like doctors and lawyers before, that didn't have the money for a full survival retreat, and we were coming up with strategies on kind of like a white collar budget, something under 100,000, something under 200,000, and one of them. Basically, we reverse engineered an area 2 to 3 hour drive from where this client lived. And we reverse engineered, and basically just with Google Earth, I found like the best locations with dead end street, 2 or 3 turns off any major road, farming, more of a farming area instead of like just trying to survive on the side of a mountain where you can't grow anything. And we found like 5 or 6 farms that were kind of tucked away over a valley. They weren't visible from the farmhouses, weren't visible right next to the road. We found 4 or 5 locations, and he literally one weekend with him and his wife just drove up there and knocked on a door and just said, hey, didn't mention prepping. Okay. Sure. But just said, hey, we live in this nearby city, and, we got 2 kids. We like to get them out. I grew up in the country and fishing. Do you mind if I rent a spot for my little tiny house RV type thing on the back end of your property? I'll keep it mowed. I'll keep, we'll be quiet. We're not partiers. It's just family. And if you get to know somebody, and so he got rejected time and time again, but he found a guy that let him do that. And so he ended up forming a friendship with this farmer. And then he said, hey, like, why don't we go garden next spring? Me and my wife, kids, do you mind if we? And so the farmer plowed up an area next to the farmer's house, and he, and the farmer was, he was an older guy. So this, his kids had moved off and weren't interested in farming. So he helped them bale hay, buck bales the one day, and he just basically never mentioned prepping, right? But just grew a friendship with this guy. And over time, he's in the spot right now where the guys agreed to sell him like an acre and a half there. And he's going to build a cabin there instead of having an RV there. So again, this isn't like, hey, this is easy. It's putting you out of your comfort zone, knocking on doors, right? Again, not talking about prepping, just talking about, going in. And so that these are just like one or two of the strategies that I lay out that are possible to do. They're going to take some legwork and they're take some time, but beggars can't be choosers. If you don't have the money to buy a fully off-grid, long-term, survival retreat with all the bells and whistles and underground food storage and security, then you got to do what you got to do.
I like that, because it's another thing that it's uncomfortable. It's awkward to get out of your comfort zone, to go knock on strangers' doors, to ask questions and to make relationships. And it's something that I don't think is maybe talked about nearly as much as it should be in preparedness. What do you think the benefit of? Obviously, I think we know, but yeah.
Because there are all these urban prepping guys. And again, a lot of them, the urban prepping guys, are short-term disaster guys, right? The second they start making videos on long-term survival in the city, all their philosophies and all their data points and all the things they're trying to, they just go out the window. They just don't make sense anymore. So a lot of the reason is because there's a whole lot of people online, and some of the most popular big preparedness channels are more interested in telling you what you want to hear instead of what you need to hear. Okay. I'm sitting here telling you, if we have a long-term grid down event, if we have a bioweapon or a pandemic with a 30-40% death rate, it's going to turn into Mad Max. This idea that we've evolved past, the Viking days and every man for himself and every family for himself. It's just not true. It's just normalcy bias. It's just because that's what you've experienced over the last 40 to 50 years.
So do you feel that EMP, what do you think is the largest threat to us right now for a grid down long-term scenario?
Well, there's largest, there's what's most dangerous, there's what's most likely, right? So it's kind of you kind of have to put it on a spreadsheet and rank them. And most people don't have access to the information I have, that haven't sat in with the government agencies and the wargaming events and looking at foreign countries' war doctrines and every enemy nation of ours, from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. First strike doctrine for World War III is an EMP attack. That's not discussed in the media. That's not really known in the media. Even all of our allies, you can win a war on day one without firing a single bullet. So the American people just are unaware of how vulnerable and how much this is America's Achilles heel here. 99% of the U.S. military bases receive their power from the civilian electric grid. And so they've warned Congress going back all the way back to 2005, 2006. I've got DOD reports to Congress telling them, in the case of a nationwide grid down event, the United States military, okay, they have backup power for 2 days. They get their food, their food on the base with trucks, just like everywhere else. Almost every chow hall is run by civilian contractors at this point. None of their food infrastructure is hardened or EMP hardened. So they're literally in the same boat as the American people. They're going to run out of food within a week on the military base. They have no backup comms. There's no plan of action. So when this event happens, the base commander, he can't turn around to a file cabinet, pull a file out and say, okay, here's step 1, 2, 3. They have no communication with the Pentagon. Like some of the stuff I learned at this wargaming operation was just, it blew my mind. It blew my mind that nobody's taking this stuff into consideration. And at the end of that task force that I was part of, that 3-day wargaming event, that was at the LeMay Wargaming Institute, General Quast and some of the leadership of the EDTF asked me to write a report on the effects of starvation and kind of human desperation, because that's kind of my wheelhouse and a lot of my research. And again, a lot of people don't look at history when looking at these kind of events. I mean, you've got the Ukrainian Holodomor, you've got the Chinese famine, you've got the Bengal famine, you got what happened in Bosnia, you've got the Warsaw ghettos and what life was like in there. If you read books, I've got dozens and dozens of books. The Minnesota Starvation Experiment from 1944. You got, like I mentioned, Philip Zimbardo and world-renowned psychologist, and the Lucifer Effect. So I put together a 122-page report on this topic for military training. And so I would highly recommend everybody download that report. If you want it in paperback, you can get it on Amazon. It's called Grid Down, Death of a Nation, The Psychology and Physiology of Human Desperation, Starvation, and Living Without Rule of Law in a Prolonged Grid Down Event. I know that's a long title, but it's called Grid Down, Death of a Nation. And so because I want as many people to access this as possible. So if you want a paperback form, you can get it there. It's a full color 8.5 by 11 report. But I want everybody to have access to this. So I give it away for free on my website. You can go to our task force website, emptaskforce.us. And on the front page there, you can go to a link to download that report. Download it, read it, and share it among your friends and families and wake some people up and start talking about a plan of action on what you and your family are going to do.
I earmarked that. I noticed it was I think a 120 some page book. I was like, that's the next one. I can't wait. I mean, I love the title anyway, whatever it is. Yeah.
Well,
so,
it's pretty dark. So I want to give you a heads up. It's very dark. So probably 30 of those pages are first-hand historical accounts of starvation. So a lot of times when people read things about starvation, they read a second-hand account or 30,000 foot or analyzing it from the top down. This is, Katrina, this is how people acted. This is how the government reacted, or this or that, or this is first-hand accounts. So I tell first-hand. There's a lot of books that give firsthand accounts of people that lived through the Chinese famine, that lived through the Holodomor. And I mean, neighbors were eating each other's kids. I mean, people need to read this and understand that these communities that this happened to, they had life skills. They had social cohesion in their neighborhoods that we don't even dream about these days. They had a lot more religious aspects. They understood how to base it. They all had chickens. I mean, they were very self-reliant 100 years ago, 150 years ago. They had skills that we don't have today. And they still, like, entire villages starved to death with the skill sets that they had. They knew that they didn't even have to know how to build a root cellar and store different things in different places in your root cellar. They already had them. Okay, so you need to look back at history and see how this impacted them, and then try and take that and put it today when, if there's a power outage for more than 2 hours, college kids are going to lose their absolute minds because their Instagram and Facebook isn't working.
I love that you take the deep look into history and sociology, because again, I hate to shit on modern prepping, but there's, again, not a lot of guys that look at history, look at sociology tied into that, and come back and say, because maybe I'm kind of interpreting a little bit, but are we prepping wrong, or are we prepping for the wrong thing?
So I do. So again, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. If you're preparing for something short term, so here's the thing. Yeah, it's going to be expensive to prepare for something long term. And so because of that, people just dismiss it. My philosophy is don't operate your preparedness in fear. Don't just, and this happens to a lot of people. They'll see a video, they'll see something that'll scare them, and then they run out the next night, or that night at 1:00 in the morning, they're buying a 1-year food plan from some long-term food company, not realizing they're only getting 3 or 4 months worth of calories. And they just rush out and they start doing things. I mean, I've had clients with multi-million dollar, very large retreats, 1,000 acres. And I come out there and, we basically have to start from scratch because they rushed out and they just did XYZ because some famous YouTube channel recommended it. And we had to kind of step back. And I've had large survival retreats that they've sold them just because they talked too much in the local town, and too many people in town knew about what they were doing. So a lot of preparedness is kind of doing it wrong. So I was saying, it's very expensive to focus on the long term, but you can't ignore it. You have to wrap your brain around it. My recommendation is plan for something long term and slowly build to that, right? Where most other kind of preparedness people are like, oh, plan for a 3-day event, and then plan for a 1-month event, and then plan for a 3-month event. Most people, blue collar people like myself, that are on certain limited finances, you're never going to graduate to the point where you're at a 2-year event. So the problem is these events are going to happen. And these people have built short-term plans, again, staying in my home, and they've never thought outside the box towards this long-term thing, right? My recommendation is to think about the long-term thing, even if you can't do everything today. Have that in your brain that way. And if something shorter happens, it's going to be a walk in the park. You know what I mean? Because your brain's already focused on something bigger. So don't focus on the little thing, focus on the big thing. Any general that goes to war is going to, he's going to want to have every piece of information about that battlefield that he's entering, from the weapons the other people are carrying to what's the weather like, what he wants every piece of data on that location he's going to be operating. I'm telling people the same thing. You need to wrap your brain around the world you're going to be living in. Then don't prep for today, prep for, Mad Max. That keep your head wrapped around that, and that's a scarier thing to do. That's a scarier time frame to kind of plan for. But I'm telling you what, right now, if you're only thinking short term that something long term happens, you're going to have made too many mistakes early on to get out of, if that makes sense. That's my perspective anyway.
No, that's fair. What I'm kind of hearing too, would you think that it would be prudent for someone to maybe try to build a business or maybe build their wealth a little bit first in order to do this? Or where do you come in on that?
So again, in survival theory 2, I have strategies. So we'll call them plan B, plan C strategies. They're not great, but they're better than staying in town. So I would recommend, if you were in that blue collar transitioning to white collar status, you still need to have a plan today. You still need to have a plan C, work towards a plan B, and potentially at some point in the future, if you hit the lottery or if you make that corner office job, then you can start on your plan A, right? So, but don't ignore it, right? Don't just kick it down kick the can down the road for another day.
Go ahead.
Real quick. Don't operate in fear, though, either. So I'm talking out two sides of my mouth. I'm scaring the dickens out of people. This is a very serious threat. This is a very likely threat, long-term grid down event that I see happening in my lifetime. But I don't live my life in fear. A lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm a Christian, and my faith is in Jesus Christ. And what happens is, if I die, I'm going to be in heaven. So I'm fine with that, right? But the idea is there's a lot of people that are really pushing for fear to get you to buy something. I'm pushing fear, truthful fear, to get you to think and to get you to read more, right? And to understand more, less than fear, hey, buy this product that I'm selling.
Any other books that you would recommend? You're a wealth of information. I've got about 4 that I've added to my list so far, but any other ones that jump out at you that could be pretty helpful?
So I would say more helpful than a lot of the prepping books out there is to read Red Famine, the Gulag Archie. Okay, let me see here. The Rape of Nanking, The Final Stamp. I've actually got a list of them, I think, on my website there you can download. But Red Famine is a huge one, is a really big one. And so is Ann Applebaum. I can't think of her book right now. I don't know why. It's one of the core features. But Ann Applebaum has a book on the Hollerman, which I think is the greatest expose of starvation that's ever been done, because it's a lot of it's firsthand accounts. So I would say, because that's the missing piece of the puzzle. I mean, it's a lot more fun to jump on YouTube and have some guy that's real charismatic, and he's out there, and he's doing this and doing that. So I tell people all the time, know who you're getting your information from, who's making these recommendations, and what their qualifications. A lot of the guys that are writing a lot of the preparedness books, I grew up hunting and fishing in Delaware. Okay. Well, what gives you the qualifications to write about long-term survive? I don't know. I'm not. Almost everybody is genuine, and they have the best intentions. They have good hearts, and some of them look at it as a way to make some money in a niche market, and I get that. And I'm a capitalist. I'm fine with that. But unfortunately, because of that, a lot of the online prepper sphere, it's just a echo chamber where I think some guy comes up with a new strategy watching The Walking Dead, and they write it on the back of a pizza box, and then they make a video the next day, and then 4 other prepper accounts make, oh, that sounds good. And they just, so all of a sudden you have all these people saying the same thing is a good idea. So just because the vast majority of people are saying, hey, this is a good idea, it just becomes truth, right? And we live in a post-truth world. It's hard to know what is true and not true these days. I mean, there's more misinformation online than there is information. So the first thing is what is the person's qualifications for giving you this information to begin with? And look at that before you start following them. So that's one of the traps is, just falling into, hey, this guy makes really entertaining videos and there's really good B-roll and it's super professional. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that he knows what he's talking about either.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I love, because I think what I liked a lot about survival theory, like I said, it was earnest, and it treated it like the event was a matter of fact. But at the same time, multiple times you're like, this isn't necessarily a matter of fact, but I'm going to treat it like it's a matter of fact so that you treat it seriously. And I appreciate that, because again, you're right. We all tend to kind of love the sound of our own voice and get lost in an echo chamber. Are there is there anything right now that you're hearing in the prepper sphere that is just horrible advice, or things that you think that's going to get somebody killed, or maybe they should try something a little different?
Yeah, without question, the idea of surviving in place in an urban environment in a long-term collapse, that's going to get 10, if not hundreds of thousands of preppers killed. This idea that you can survive a long-term event in a home in suburban USA. Again, so I realize that I'm one of the few people that the people listening to your show have probably ever said this to them, and everybody else is saying the opposite. Everyone else is telling you it'll be just fine. This is how you hide it in your basement, and this is how the gray man. I mean, come on, please. If you get nothing else from this, read the report that I wrote. The historical accounts, the psychology and physiology behind starvation, how it's going to affect the people that are around you. This idea of hanging out in town comes from Hollywood. It really does. This idea that you've got 50,000 people in a medium-sized town that live in very close proximity to each other with no resources, and you take away those resources, you take away their heat, their air conditioning, their phones, their banking, their interstate trucking, you take away their radios and their TV. They have no lines of communication. They have family members that are out of town that may be dead. They have no idea what's going on. Rioting and looting kick off pretty quickly, and there's going to mistrust breeds in that. And again, this whole idea of joining together with a group in your neighborhood and your neighbors. Yes, that makes perfect sense for a week, for 2 weeks. And I'm sitting here telling you, if people start to starve, if they start, and I don't mean like missing a meal or two, I'm saying once people start to starve, your little group of merry men that, your handshake agreement, security detail that you've done, that's all going out the window. You're going to get a bullet in your back if you're the only one in town, that only one on the block that actually took this seriously. So, I mean, I hear this also. Hey, I'm going to join forces with my neighbors, and proactively before the collapse, they're having meetings with their cul-de-sac, and they're making all these plans because they've read all these prepper fiction books that have painted it out like, oh, this is realistic, and this is what you can do, and you're going to fight off the motorcycle gang of looters, and they have all this brain dump that they put into their brain, and they make proactive plans. I can tell you right now, you might have a whole bunch of people in your group or on your cul-de-sac that love to sit around and jive, with you on this subject and talk about it and talk. But if you don't know for a fact that they're putting the food away, I'd be willing to bet most people talk a big game. Very few of them actually put the food away. It's one of the number one things I do when I do survival retreat analysis. The number one thing that I see, I've got clients with hundreds of thousands of dollars of guns and ammunition. They've got miniguns. They've got bulletproof houses. They've got 2,000, 3,000 acres. They've got $15,000 worth of food. The number one thing I see is people not taking their food storage preparation serious enough at a survival retreat. And the other side of that is because they're sitting there and they, it's a husband, a wife, and 2 children, and they went out and bought a 1-year food plan for a family of 4, not realizing the disingenuousness of most of the food plan companies are actually giving you only 800 calories a day, which is a starvation diet. I mean, read the Minnesota starvation experience. Those guys had 1,500 calories a day, and they looked like skeletons by the end of 6 months, right? So they're not, you don't have as much food as you think you do. And in almost every case, more people are going to show up because they know you're prepper again, because that's another issue. You're talking about it too much. And then your cousins show up, and then your mom and dad show up. And then, well, you can't turn away kin. I get that. And then what happens when it's your second cousin that shows up at your front door? So all these prepper fiction books, all the gunfights that these guys get into, and I'm all about having the best weapons and the best training. Don't get me wrong, but all these gunfights, it's always some nameless, faceless redneck or some bad guy or some biker gang. It's always some crazy person that's coming for your food. I'm sitting here telling you, the person that's going to be at your door arguing with you to let them in, okay, for trying to force you going back, it's probably going to be your second cousin. It's probably going to be a coworker from, this idea that you're just going to blow someone's head off and go to bed that night. It's probably going to be a face that someone that you're previously friends with, or 6 degrees 7 bacon, someone found out what you were doing. So these are all things to take into consideration. And just the idea of surviving in a city for an extended period of time, I'm sorry, and some people may get upset for me, but it's clown shoes. It's not reality. Again, read Selko Begovic's book, Who Lived Through This. I think in his opening preface, he talks about if he could go back and change one thing, he would have fled that city before they got surrounded, before he got trapped in there. That he said, but he was young, and crazy stuff was happening. He wanted to see how it all played out, and he stayed, and it got really ugly. And he witnessed really horrific things happen to the people around him. And he pokes fun at American prepping. And he's like, it's like a form of entertainment for people to get into prepping instead of taking it seriously. So my recommendation for people is everybody has, if you're a modern adult in America and you don't have a health insurance, dental insurance, if you don't have car insurance or insurance on your house or insurance on your electronics, if you don't have a life insurance policy for your wife and kids or for your husband and kids, you're an irresponsible adult because you're not preparing for a rainy day. But if you start putting some food and water aside and make a plan of action, now you're a crazy person, right? Now you're you've got mental problems, right? So for thousands of years, people stored up food to get through the winter, to get through the harvest season. So I see you have a question down there. You want me to answer that?
Yeah, I'll read it out for those on the audio.
Sure.
But K-Bonk wants to know best calories protein to store. Because again, as you said, a lot of times these storage companies are disingenuous, or the pallet from Costco has a 40-pound bucket of peanut butter on it to pump up the numbers. So
exactly
what
right.
are your opinion on that?
So free on my website. If you go to the books tab on my website, go down to the very bottom, you can download a interactive Excel spreadsheet. So for a family of 4 on foodassets.com, I am not affiliated with them. I get no kickbacks. It's just they're a reputable company that I liked. I built a long-term food plan for a family of 4. Long-term food has almost doubled in price since COVID in just the last 3 years. The price of it has gone through the roof. So a lot of people look at Mountain House and Wise and My Patriot Supply and all these prepackaged, pre-made food plans. You're going to pay about 5 to 6 times as much money going that route than you will by buying the staples, the rice, the beans, the different supplies. I did an analysis. So again, this is going back to prices 3 years ago. But when I wrote Survival Theory 1, it's actually more than that, 5 or 6 years ago. My 1 year food plan, so that's based on caloric needs of an average family of 4. I think it was 6,000 calories a day. Was at 4,000. I think it's 6,000 now, but it was $4,000 back then and so it was staples, but it was also all your seasonings and different types of breakfast meals, but it's stuff you might have to prepare as opposed to the prepackaged stuff, which are loaded with sodium and all kinds of other stuff. I'm not saying not to have part of that. So part of the preparedness packages that I recommend people is having like 10% of those pre-made meals that you can just throw in a skillet and have it done quick. But if money is no object, by all means spend it. But when I did that analysis, my food plan I put together for calories was $4,000. When I got the cheapest, and I went to tons of different places researching this, case of number 10 cans of Mountain House. The cheapest I could find that same 6,000 calories for a year was 24,000. It was 6 times as much money as buying the staples. So probably the cheapest place today to get those staples, and again, you're not going to get everything you need, is actually the LDS Church. They have not raised their prices. I have clients that have bought multiple pallets of food from them, and they have a flat rate shipping for $5 regardless of how much you buy. But there you can buy cases of number 10 cans of beans and rice and onions and peas and different things like that from it's kind of hard to find. I can't remember if it's the LDS. It's the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. They have a store where you can buy staples. And so I would recommend checking them out. That's really cheap. As far as protein, without question, the best survival protein is meat rabbits. You can start out with like 3 meat rabbits, a male and 2 females, as long as you regularly breed them once or twice a year so they're ready. And the collapse hits the fan, you instantly breed those 2 rabbits. On average, you're going to get 8 to 10 kits per litter, and you can basically start a colony of rabbits. A single female rabbit on a breeding schedule can have, averages about 64 babies a year. You can get 40% of your caloric needs met every year just having a single female meat rabbit on a breeding schedule. So that is and they're quiet. They're real easy to feed. They don't get, if you have the proper facilities, they don't get sick easily. You can feed them with stuff that you can find in your yard or on your property, as opposed to having pelletized or stored up dog food or this or that for different animals. So that's my number one recommendation. Probably a grain fodder system would be best with a couple meat rabbits. And yeah.
I love it, man. I could pick your brain all day. I want to ask a little bit about your books. Do you still have a couple more minutes, or am I?
Sure. Let's go a couple more.
Okay. All right. So I didn't tell you this, but we have a post-apocalyptic book club that we do where we read and discuss and that kind of thing, which I love. So your book's going to be added to the reading list. So I'm going to work through the Equipping Modern Patriots because I'm always looking for good fiction. But you said you got a book 4 coming out soon?
Kind of.
Okay.
It's a long story. People are waiting. Some of them are gonna be upset to find out that book 4 doesn't actually take place. Start picking up after book 3. It's actually one of my characters from book 3. I'm going back to day one, and he doesn't make all the right choices. So you'll see my main character in my books is a SEER instructor. Go figure. And so he makes a lot of the right decisions, right? So I'm going to start with this character from day 1. And he's actually going to make the wrong decisions. He goes into the green zones and stays in town. So I'm going to paint that picture, but the books will eventually merge again and pick up where they left off. So that book, I've got probably 65-70% written. I'm on a time crunch because I actually signed a shopping agreement with a media outlet here so I over the last year actually made it into a TV show. So we're trying to get a TV show made. Again, it's a long shot with anything, but we have some high hopes that, someone might pick this up and we have some connections. We'll see what happens. But so I've spent a lot of time so people were been waiting for a while for this next fiction book, but that was the reason I was really trying to get it made into a TV show to wait. I think it'll wake more people up. It'll reach more people. Right. So now I'm detransitioning it from the TV show back into the book form. So hopefully for Christmas, I'll have it out.
So, I won't make you stick to a date, but you're thinking the book sometime before the end of the year then is kind of the plan?
Yep.
And what's the TV series like, getting a TV script and a showrunner? I don't even know how far along that process you are, but what's that kind of like?
It's a nightmare. so yeah, we're early on in the process. Again, like I said, I did sign a shopping agreement with a couple guys from Hollywood there that were very interested. They're very aware of the Grid Down event. So that's my biggest thing. I mean, I would I would almost give the show away if I could be sure it would be made properly and not turned into smut or turned into some sci-fi unrealistic. So it's very critical for me. Like, I'm going to be willing to take less money to have some kind of technical input with the writing team, in the sense of it's important that the technical aspects of the EMP and the aftermath are correct for me. Like Revolutions, it turned into some like magic necklace or something. You could turn it always goes into some creative way. And so, I mean, we're bringing in a writing team, and they need to have the ability to put their own stamp on it. And I get that they're going to change names, they're going to change stories. I'm fine with that, but the technical aspects of it are real important. I'm hoping to hang on to some of those, be a technical advisor show. But again, we're early in the process. So
sure. So creative control is important, or at least to an extent.
Yeah, I wouldn't say creative control. You're not going to get anywhere today with creative. I wouldn't be able to get whole creative control. I got to give that away, but
Fair.
I'm hoping to hang on to some technical aspects control.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. You know what? I had a random thought of one day. Did you ever watch Jericho? The TV.
So I've seen a couple episodes of it. The problem is, like, I was Johnny Come Lately. That show's from like the early 2000s, if I remember correctly. And I watched like 2 or 3 episodes. And it was entertaining, but I just never stuck with it. So I don't have anything good or bad to say about it because I never watched the whole show. But yeah, no, that's okay. I was kind of curious because anyway, Revolution, we go down a whole nother rabbit hole. That was a huge disappointment. It was bad. A train wreck.
Yeah, it was so bad.
When the special operations team walks in, there's like, you got 8 or 9 guys, full kit, battle rifles, body armor, and a guy with a sword in the middle of the room takes on that stuff. It just drives me nuts. I'm like, I can suspend reality, to a certain extent, John Wick, because that you're getting what you're getting, you know what I mean? But if this is, I think the first scene, like, people were like mowing their yards and everybody's hair was combed and face was clean and Revolutions. And, and I'm just like, that's not what this world looks like at all. You know what I mean? Like, people are like hanging out in their neighborhood. I don't know. That show, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you like that show, but that show, we were literally laughing with tears in our eyes. We were making fun of it so bad at our viewing party we had with some of the guys.
I would love sometime to bring you back on, just to maybe not tear apart, but have some fun with some of the more Hollywood tropes, because I think you'd give some pretty good insight into some of that if you're up for it down the road, because
that's on my short list. So I'm not trying to build a big media presence. I'm so business with I've got 3 careers. I mean, I'm a writer, I'm a business, a grid down consultant, and I'm also working with the task force and trying to get the government to harden the grid and everything. So, but that's one of the things I've always, if I was going to build it, would be just like a reaction video, like doing reaction videos of movies and different things, and kind of just laughing about them. I don't know.
No, that'd be cool. Anyway, yeah, you're good at it. All right. So How do people support you, Jonathan? Where can they, what can they do right now to throw money at you, or no, to make sure that you're, they can support what you're doing?
Sure. So, I mean, the biggest thing is I would recommend everyone go out tomorrow and watch, go to the website griddownpowerup.com, griddownpowerup.com. David Tice directed a fantastic movie. It's narrated by, wow, why can't I think?
It's okay. Somebody we'd recognize.
Dennis
anyway.
Quaid. Dennis Quaid.
There
Sorry, Dennis. So it's narrated by Dennis Quaid, and it's a 1-hour documentary on the grid down threats and what that looks like, and the fight that we're doing with the government. Me and David Tice, the director, we were at the Western Conservative Summit speaking this summer, and we've been at a couple events together. So like, go to watch that video, share that, wake as many people up to the various threats as possible. He's got a great back end to his website where he helps people like find out who their legislator is, like pre-canned letters that you can customize and send to your legislator. So definitely support him. Our website for our task force is emptaskforce.us. Securethegridcoalition.com is another organization that, so we're fighting against the electric utilities that have unlimited resources, and we're all donation funded. So definitely reach out and help some of these organizations that are trying to wake the government up and harden the grid. Me personally, griddownconsulting.com, griddownconsulting.com. Again, highly recommend download the white paper I wrote for the EDTF. It's on the resources tab under Grid Down Report. Share that far and wide. On Amazon, just Jonathan Hollerman. All my books are available on paperback, Kindle, audiobook. And then on Instagram, at Grid Down Prepper. I'm on Facebook, but I'm not on there much. And then I was trying to think, on Patreon, follow me on Patreon. So I do interact with people a lot more on Patreon as a paid service, and do live Q&As and put out spreadsheets and stuff like that.
Well, thank you, brother. This was great. I absolutely. You came on short notice. I know you mentioned you're on vacation and you got right back to me. So I very much appreciate it. This was a fun conversation.
Man, I appreciate you having me on. And did I hear that right? You're up in Canada?
Don't hold it against me. But yeah, no, I'm in Alberta. And we just bought land in Tennessee as well. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Well, Alberta is kind of like the West Virginia of the United States, I think, right?
I like to call it. Yeah. You're not wrong. You're 100% right.
I meant that, I live in West Virginia, so I'm saying that in a good sense. Like, yeah, you're kind of one of the, because I know British Columbia is ruled by like Vancouver now, right? And they're going very. You can take BC and equate it to California, absolutely. And I totally don't mind being equated to West Virginia, because yes, I get the equitation there, and 100%, yeah, because we're the closest. Anyway, we're the closest kind of bastion of freedom you're going to find in Canada. That's what I was getting at. Yeah. So no, I appreciate you. If you hang for 30 seconds in the back, I'll close the show down and I'll be right back with you there, brother. Yeah, man. Thank you. Great being here, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you. Guys, I was absolutely floored. I always love when you guys are like, you need to get a guy on here. And I had read Survival Theory 1 first, and then went back and reread it this week because I wanted to be up on it. But if you take one thing away, it's the fact that maybe it's not that we're not prepping right, but just listen to what Jonathan was passionate about. It's not it's not a good scenario, but be positive out of it as well. But look at it and say, here it is. This is what starvation looks like. Take some time, look into it, and see what can we do to make life a little bit better on the other end. And guys, he is welcome back anytime. So make sure you support him. Pick up the books if you haven't read them. And we're going to be doing the EMP book series for the Post-Apocalyptic Book Club going forward. So anyway, guys, I appreciate you as always. Stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.